Hi, AP World History students. Mrs. Longnecker here. And today I want to bring you another lesson about LEQs. So students in my class, this is going to be about the essay that you have just written, and it'll include some information about your revision assignment at the end of the video. For students not in my class, this is still a video that you could watch to look at some samples from an AP World practice LEQ and think about your own work and your own writing and how you can make improvements both in your essays in class and as you prepare for the AP exam in May. So let's get started. A quick reminder about the prompt. So the prompt that we're going to be looking at samples for in this case is here on the screen. Evaluate the extent to which methods of imperial administration in Afro-Eurasian states or empires between 200 BCE and 600 CE changed from earlier political forms. Now, a couple of things about this prompt before we dive into looking at some examples. The first is that this is a change and continuity over time essay. We have that evaluate extent to which language in the prompt. We also clearly have the word changed. So that tells us that should be the focus here. Afro-Eurasian states or empires between 200 BCE and 600 CE places us in time period 2, but does give us a wide range of states or empires to draw examples from. Not everything from Unit 2 is eligible necessarily as the main topic of this essay, but even the earlier civilizations in time period 2 or from time period 1 can become relevant details because we also have that phrase about earlier political forms. So we have lots of room there. The last thing I want to say about the prompt before we get into some examples is the section that I've put in bold here, which is this phrase, methods of imperial administration. And so what we're looking for in an essay on this prompt is a discussion of how governments rule over their people, how they control their people, how does the government or the state influence the people inside its boundaries. That's what we're looking for specifics about in this particular essay. And so you may know things about these civilizations, about social structure and patriarchy, or about religion and culture that aren't necessarily relevant to this prompt. So you want to be sure as you were writing this essay that you're thinking about all of that when you're putting it together. So we're going to look at a couple of examples. And if you're one of my students, you should have some hard copies of this. You either got them in class or you were able to download them from our Schoology page. Students who are not in my class, you're going to have to follow along with me on the screen, and you won't necessarily be able to do the highlighting portion of this. But my students, I would encourage you to take your hard copy of these samples and highlight with this color coding. And you can use highlighters, pens, or colored pencils. But we're using 5 different colors because there's really 5 different things that we might be looking for in a quality sample from this essay. So for the thesis, we're looking for 2 different things. Number 1 is I want you to identify where in the thesis you see reference to methods of imperial administration. Basically, we're checking the topics in these example thesis statements to see whether or not they match the prompt. We also want to, so we're going to highlight methods in green. The other thing in the thesis is what I call the because element of the claim. The College Board wants a thesis statement to be more than just a plain description of this happened and this happened. There needs to be some element of adding value, and because the College Board is looking in the thesis statement for a historically defensible claim, claims always have some component of analysis. So the because element of the thesis statement might include the word because, or there might be an implied brief analytical statement that sets up analysis for later body paragraphs. If and when you see that, I want you to highlight it in orange in the thesis statement. These samples that you're going to look at will be a thesis statement and 1 body paragraph because that's all I could fit on the screen in a reasonable font size. So in the body paragraph, you want to find a clear statement of what changed or what stayed the same. And you would highlight that in yellow. Hopefully, we'll see that in the topic sentence of these paragraphs, but maybe not. So anywhere in the paragraph where you see just a statement of the change or continuity, that's in yellow. The specific facts or details, we're going to do a couple of different things to differentiate these facts or details. So facts or details from the classical era. So, and really not just the classical era, but 200 BCE to 600 CE. We want to highlight those in pink. A word of warning for those of you who are highlighting: facts and details are generally not entire sentences. So you might be highlighting words or phrases or portions of sentences in pink, but you are unlikely to be highlighting a whole sentence in your pink. If you see examples or details from those previous eras outside of the time period from the prompt, you can underline those because those are still valuable facts that could earn you points on a College Board rubric. But we definitely need facts from the empires specifically mentioned in the prompt. And so those we're going to highlight in pink. And then we're also looking for an analytical element in the body paragraphs. And specifically, it's analysis of why the change occurred or why the continuity occurred. If and when you see that in the body paragraph, I want you to highlight that in blue. And that might be a complete sentence, or it might be the second half of a sentence that starts out with some evidence, for example. So there's a lot of variation about what we might be doing here. If you're highlighting at home, you might want to pause the video right now and just jot down for yourself a quick color coding key so you know what the different colors mean. All right, now that you have your key ready to go, let's take a look at your first example. Now, for those of you who don't have a hard copy with you at home, I'll go ahead and read the example out loud. You can read it along with me on the screen, and if you are able to, go ahead and highlight on your hard copy. If you're not able to, at least think about the phrases that you would highlight in the different colors, or maybe pause the video after I finish reading and jot down key phrases that you think would be eligible for those different colors that you've identified in your key. So here we go. Between 200 BCE and 600 CE in the Roman Empire, although the unification of Europe and the idea of citizenship changed, the divine status of rulers, along with slavery as a large part of society, continued from previous eras because the civilizations that Rome conquered and the people in them influenced the social and political culture of their new government. Many aspects of life in the Roman Empire were different than they had been in the civilizations that preceded it. The Roman Empire was the first empire to unite so much of Europe and the Mediterranean basin under one state. This was a big, I think that should say change, from the individual city-states of Greece and Mesopotamia, where the person in charge lived in the same area and knew the social and physical environment of the people. In the Roman Empire, the ruler could have been hundreds of miles away. Another big change was the idea of citizenship. Most previous political forms, like Persia and Egypt, only had people who were under their rule. In Rome, however, some people were citizens, which gave them rights that non-citizens did not have. The previous city-state of Athens in Greece also had the idea of citizenship, but in Athens, only men who were born there could be citizens, while in Rome, citizenship was also open to conquered peoples. Go ahead and pause the video now and do your highlighting or jot down your key phrases that would go with each color. Now that you've highlighted on your paper, let's take a look at my highlighting and I'll talk you through what I saw and what I think works and doesn't work in this sample. So here's my highlighting. In the thesis statement, I've highlighted in green unification of Europe and the idea of citizenship changed and the divine status of rulers continued. But notice I'm not highlighting in green all of the topics that this student included in their thesis statement, because one of these topics, one of the continuities, is not a method of imperial administration. Unification, citizenship, and divine status of rulers would all go under that big umbrella of imperial administration, ways the government rules over or imposes control on its people. Slavery, however, is much more of an economic structure or a social status of people within society. So that's not necessarily going to be a method of imperial administration. And in general, when we see students write about slavery in a prompt like this, it very often doesn't work because there's not enough discussion of the role of the state in slavery. I've also highlighted in orange the because element, because the civilizations that Rome conquered and the people in them influenced the social and political culture of their new government. Now, this isn't a very clear analytical piece of this thesis statement, but I appreciate the attempt here because what this student has noticed is that as Rome expanded and conquered new peoples, those people influenced Rome and Rome influenced the people that it conquered. It's kind of a two-way street. And so I would expect to see some analysis of how that influence comes into Rome and goes out from Rome in the body paragraphs. That's what I would hope to see. So I've gone ahead and highlighted that in orange in the thesis statement. In the body paragraph, notice that my yellow highlighter doesn't show up until very near the end of the paragraph. That's because this person has included multiple topics within this change paragraph. It's almost like a list of changes. The Roman Empire is the first to unite so much of Europe. There's a big change from the city-states. It's not really clear what's going on there. The ruler's hundreds of miles away. I don't really know what's going on. But then we get to this idea of citizenship. Most previous political forms like Persia and Egypt only had people who were under their rule. In Rome, however, some people were citizens, which gave them rights that non-citizens did not have. That is the closest we have to a statement of change. And even that statement is much more comparative than change over time. What I would hope to see instead would be something about how Rome changed from this earlier form, not just that Rome was different. Because when you compare the two civilizations, you're not using the historical thinking skill that's required, and so your analysis suffers because of it. Notice that there's no blue highlighted anywhere in this body paragraph, because this person hasn't given enough of the change element, the explanation of what changed and why it changed. This person does have a specific example from Rome that citizenship was open to conquered peoples, and an example from a previous political form that in Athens only men who were born there could be citizens. Those are both two reasonable details to go along with the idea that Roman citizenship was a departure from earlier forms. What I would hope to see, though, if we were going to flesh out this section of the paragraph, would be an analysis of why many of those earlier forms, like Persia or Egypt, or even Athens that did have citizenship, why those forms were transformed or changed as the Roman Empire grew and adopted its own idea of citizenship. So I'm not going to ask you to necessarily rewrite this example here, but if you are thinking about this and you don't have an essay that you've written on this, think about what would you write? What could you say to help flesh out or elaborate this change element at the bottom of this body paragraph? Now would be another good time to pause the video and maybe brainstorm some ideas. Give some thought to what you might say, because when you start the video back up, I'm going to move on to another example. All right, this is example 3 because it matches up with example number 3 on the hard copy that I handed out in class or that my students have in front of them. So I know it's our second example in the video, but the number 3 is there on purpose. So again, I'm going to read aloud for those of you just watching on the video and being able to see what's here on the screen. And I would encourage you then to pause the video and jot down some of the key phrases that would go along with your color-coded key. Or if you have the hard copy in front of you, go ahead and highlight on your copy based on that key that we were using before. Between 200 BCE and 600 CE in Han, China, although they abandoned the use of legalism significantly, the use of ruling under a common philosophy that nearly everyone followed continued from previous eras because they saw it as a successful way of uniting and creating peace among their empire's people. For example, a commonly used method of rule in classical China was the mandate of heaven. This was one continuity that lasted in China for many years and was adopted by the Han Empire when they picked up and took off after the collapse of the Qin. The mandate of heaven was the belief in what could be referred to as the supernatural and the divinity of rulers. This belief was commonly used to assert power in the leaders of China, and we know this because it was common to find emperors referred to as the Son of Heaven. The mandate of heaven also allowed for an easier way of deciding upon new rulers, or when it was time for a new one, because it was believed that this mandate could be lost when an outbreak, rebellion, or other calamity took place. Overall, when the Han took over the Qin, they decided to keep the ideas of the Mandate of Heaven and the key ideas of reunification and peace due to their past being just warring states. China strongly believed in peace among the people and used common philosophies, for back then, like legalism and Confucianism, to unite. Go ahead and pause the video now, make any notes or highlighting that you want to, and when you hit play again, you'll get to see my highlighter. So here's what I've highlighted in this section. Notice in the thesis statement that I've only highlighted the change as being a clear statement of a method of imperial administration, that they abandoned the use of legalism significantly. I haven't highlighted the continuity in green because the ruling under a common philosophy that nearly everyone followed is really vague and very difficult to prove in a clear way. So I would argue that's not a very strong element in this thesis statement. However, I do like the because element, that they saw it as a successful way of uniting and creating peace among their empire's people. So that this common philosophy that I would hope to see clarified in a revision to this thesis statement could be elaborated on and clarified, but then continue with this same because element, the same analytical piece that sets it up well for this body paragraph. Now what's interesting is that the body paragraph that comes next is actually about the continuity, and it starts with for example. Now, for example, not the best way to start a body paragraph, but it does the trick here because it sets up exactly what this person is talking about and actually clarifies what they probably meant to say in their thesis statement. So for example, a common used method of rule in classical China was the Mandate of Heaven. This was one continuity that lasted in China, etc., etc. So there we have it, a clear statement of continuity that in China, the Mandate of Heaven comes from those earlier political forms and continued through the Han Dynasty. And there's a couple of examples here that emperors are referred to as the Son of Heaven. That's an accurate fact about the rule of Chinese emperors, both in the Han Dynasty and in the preceding dynasties. There's also an explanation of the Mandate of Heaven and that it could be lost when an outbreak, rebellion, or other calamity took place. So this fact is a little bit more descriptive and less specific, detailed example, right? There's no proper nouns in this particularly, but it is a clear description of something that is accurate about Chinese rule and the philosophies of Chinese rule. So it's a pretty strong example. What I might like to see in terms of examples in this would be previous dynasties. Now, the Qin are mentioned, but how did previous dynasties use the Mandate of Heaven? Or when in Chinese history did the Mandate of Heaven start, so that we can see how long it's been a continuity in Chinese history? That would be a good detail to think about. I would also like to see how this Mandate of Heaven was used as a way for emperors to rule. We can see that it relates to the change in dynasties, but it's not thoroughly explained yet. So there is some room for growth in this, even though they do have a clearly stated continuity, a couple of clearly stated details, and even a little bit of blue highlighter here with some analysis. That when the Han took over the Qin, they decided to keep the ideas due to their past being warring states. Now again, I think this could be clarified and explained how this idea of continuity and the Mandate of Heaven was a way for emperors to legitimize their rule, to give themselves authority that people would honor and respect. It taps into older Chinese beliefs that also may have continued along with these new governments. There's a lot of examples and analysis that could be expanded on in this to give it a little bit more depth, a little bit more historical complexity. But for what it is, there are some elements here that accomplish many of the main tasks that we're looking for in a quality response to this particular prompt. So at this point, if you are watching from another class, this might be a good time to stop the video because the next couple of things I'm going to talk about are very specific to my classes. I'm going to talk about some pitfalls students had when writing about this particular prompt, and I'm going to remind them of their rewrite assignment because this video is going to be watched by people who may have missed class on the day when I talked about this. So for those of you who are leaving us, Have an excellent day. For those of you sticking around for the next section of this video, I will be quick and get you on your way as well. So 3 major pitfalls that I saw when reading your first drafts of these essays. Pitfall number 1 was the issue of topics, that your topics need to be methods of imperial administration. They need to focus on how the governments ruled over the people. Some examples of topics that did not work for anybody who tried them. Patriarchy did not work for anybody who tried it. Patriarchy is the idea of male superiority over females, and it's an element of social structure, and it's really important, but it isn't necessarily a way that governments ruled over their empires. So patriarchy is not a good example. Social classes are also not a good example. General hierarchy is not a good example. Philosophy and religious beliefs also don't work because they're not really what the prompt is talking about. Sorry for the background noises there. We're really focusing on what does the government do. Second major pitfall that we saw are needing details from the classical era, particularly that later part of the classical era. So if you're discussing the Roman Empire, you need details about Rome. If you're discussing Han China, you need details from Han China. You can also have those facts from the previous political forms, but you need the specific examples from the civilization that you're detailing in the bulk of your essay. It's not enough to say that, older civilizations had X and Rome didn't, or older civilizations had Y and Han China kept it going. You want to, as much as possible, pull specifics from the empire or civilization that you've named and that fits the time period of the prompt. And the last major pitfall is that analysis of change or continuity. This should not be about comparing civilizations. If you find yourself in your own essay reading phrases like, and the Roman Empire differed from Persia, or Han China differed from the Qin, or Han China was similar to the Qin, that says to me, and it should say to you, that you are comparing rather than analyzing change over time. You want to think about, why did the change occur? Why did something stay the same? And this analytical element is difficult because this is your own reasoning based on the evidence rather than something you are going to find in a textbook or an online article. You have to write your own analytical statements based on the evidence that you're pulling from your other resources rather than relying on those resources to give you both evidence and analysis. It's tough, I know. So let's talk about your assignment and what specifically you need to do for this essay rewrite in order to earn your full credit for doing your full essay process. So first thing you should do is you should look at the rubric that you have attached to your essay. It's got some feedback on it in terms of what you did well and areas where you need to make improvements. The second thing you should do is you should reread your essay. Based on the activities that you've just been through in this video or in class, and based on what you've seen in the rubric, what do you see in your essay? What's working? What's not working? You could even highlight your own work using the same color code that we did if you want. It's not a requirement, but you should reread what you have written to figure out where you need to make changes. And changes could include revising your topic choices. If you wrote about patriarchy, you should not be writing about patriarchy in your rewrite. If your other topics are unclear or vague, you need to clarify those because you'll definitely need to revise your thesis statement. So you need to rewrite your thesis statement to clarify or change your topics if necessary, and make sure that your thesis statement includes that because element for your claim. And if necessary, clarify that because element to make it stronger and better based on the work that you've just done. And then I want you to rewrite specifically your body paragraph about change. Everybody's going to do your change body paragraph because that was the weakest paragraph in every essay I read. Continuity paragraphs also could use some work, but we're going to keep this to just thesis statement and one body paragraph. So specifically the change body paragraph, you need to include an appropriate topic. So make sure that you really have a method of imperial administration and you state what changed. You need specific and detailed evidence, including evidence from the classical era, so from the Roman Empire or Gupta India or Han China, and you need the analysis statement of why that change occurred. You got some time to work on this, but you're going to type your revisions And you're going to submit them to the assignment in turnitin.com, and it's due at 11:59 p.m. Wednesday, November 7th. So if you've got questions or concerns, or you need help, or your computer is not working at home, please contact me as soon as possible so that I can get you the help and support you need to make these revisions, make these corrections, and figure out how to do things better on your second draft. Even if your first draft is pretty good, what can you do better to grow on this draft? That's all for today. Thanks for watching this whole video, and I'll see you in the next one.